Much better.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, good morning. I hear you guys have a little bit of snow.
Yeah, half of our class isn't here. There's only like 6 of us in class today.
That's okay.
Yeah. But anyways, we're glad to see you again.
Glad to be with you.
Should we start with the question?
Yeah, so we spent some time yesterday, today, kind of looking at the progress so far. And we watched a bit of a brief hearing. It's been a while. We watched that last week, I think. But if there's any brand new news, we definitely want to hear that. And we do have some questions to ask as well.
Yeah, so I looked at the bill report and it looks like it got a hearing yesterday. And it is scheduled for executive session, which we talked about means that I'm just pulling up the bill report. Yeah, it had a public hearing yesterday and is scheduled for executive session on Friday, which is good news, means the bill's moving right along. So that's exciting. I did a little reading up on the bill, but I was wondering if maybe we could start out by having somebody give kind of a brief overview of your understanding of what the bill does.
Does anyone want to give a brief overview of the bill?
Yeah.
Okay, people up here.
Just in plain English, what is the bill? What does it do?
So just a recap of what the bill does. What is the point of this bill? If it passed into law, what would happen? Yeah, come on up.
Hello.
Hello.
And so what was the question again?
Just what does the bill do in just like plain terms? What's the problem? What is the bill trying to fix or do?
And it's trying to get parents to invest in their kids' education and put like money for them when they grow up so they can like pay off and tuition and all that stuff.
Yep.
It's trying to, and if they try to decide something else or try to put the money in something set so they can do that or invest in something else, and that's basically it.
To give them control over the investments?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my understanding too. I think it's a little bit technical in that, my understanding is there's this thing called the GET account, which is the guaranteed tuition savings or something where, you can make a small investment, when a kid is a child, and it will basically say however much money you put into that account will be equal to, a percentage of the tuition in the future for college. And what I don't quite understand, but I'll try to get a better handle on, is basically that money that you put into that account as parent, it's an investment. So it's supposed to grow and get more money. And it has been doing that. But for some reason, while the investment has been growing in those accounts, there's something going on where because tuition has been flat, the investment, it hasn't exactly grown in the way that they thought it would. So what my understanding of the bill is that it allows parents to be able to transfer the money from that GET account into a different type of account called a 529 account. And basically the parent or the family is getting the difference in what the investment has grown. And they're able to either take that out or reinvest it or something. But my basic understanding is there's some sort of unique problem with the type of account, the GET account. And so this bill would enable them to move that money into a different account where they would be able to reclaim some of that investment in the account. That's my basic understanding. I was hoping to get some more information before today, but yeah, that's my basic understanding.
Yeah, and so I have a question for you. And so, if the House makes amendments to the bill and it passes through the chamber, and how hard will it be for Senate and House to agree on the changes?
Great question. Yes. Tell me your name again, sir.
And Mohammed.
Before you answer, Emily, I'm gonna. It's hard for us to see your image. I'm gonna turn the classroom lights off, but you tell me if it makes it impossible for you to see us.
Okay.
That,
Yeah, I think it's very hard.
So dark.
You can't see anything.
all right.
Like the spooky Halloween version. So great question. So the question is, we're dealing with a Senate bill. We know it passed through the Senate. It passed off the Senate floor, and now it comes over to the House. If the House makes amendments to the bill, then there has to be some sort of process by which they reconcile those differences. Now, that can go to a conference. It's usually called a conference committee or something like that. And the question is, how hard is it for the Senate and the House to be able to agree on whatever the changes that are made in the House? So it's a great question. And like most great questions, the answer is, it depends. It depends on how serious or how big the changes are that the House or that the other chamber makes. And, so if they were to really change the bill in a way that it made it a substantially more costly bill, where it costs a lot more to the state, then it might be harder, right? Because there's a disagreement about how much money the bill costs. My sense is that the bill, that any changes that the House is going to make or has made at this point, I haven't looked into it, but that they would be fairly minor. And because they would be fairly minor changes, it wouldn't be very hard to get the two chambers to agree on the differences. Usually they'll make sort of technical amendments at this point, and those things will be pretty easily agreed upon. My understanding too about this bill, and I could be wrong, and I'm hoping when you guys come down to Olympia, I think it's next week, we can have a conversation with the bill sponsor who can answer a lot more of these questions too. But my understanding of this bill is it doesn't cost money to the general fund. And the general fund is basically the big piggy bank of the legislature that they use to pay for all sorts of things. This bill, the financial pieces of this bill are regarding this, what's called the State Investment Board, which is this totally other pot of money. And so if it doesn't have significant implications to the general fund, the piggy bank of the legislature, then it shouldn't be too controversial for the House and the Senate to agree on those changes. But it really does, at the end of the day, depend on what kind of changes the House makes. The other thing I'll just note very quickly in regard to the very good question you asked is one of the things about bills is they have what's called a title, okay? So the title of the bill, any changes to the bill or any of the implications of the piece of legislation have to fit, quote unquote, fit within the title, okay? So there is this idea, what's called scope and object, that anything in a particular bill has to fit within the title. So if you have a pretty, what they call a narrow title or a tight title, it doesn't mean the bill is really cool. Tight title. Nope, it just means, I gotta laugh. It just means that it's very specific, right? So that means you can't kind of monkey around with putting a lot of different things in a bill because it's got a tight title or a narrow title. So what that means in regard to your question is they probably, and I'd have to look at the title of this bill, but they probably can't put a ton of stuff into this bill because usually they draft the title of the bill so that it can't have a lot of different things going on in it, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
your question is, it depends on what they do to the bill. If it's a big, big deal and it fundamentally changes a lot about the bill, then yes, it could be hard for them to come to an agreement. My sense is this is a fairly technical bill and it will stay that way. So it probably will not be very hard for them to come to an agreement in a conference committee about how to reconcile it.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question to that. And how do they decide who reconciles from the Senate and from the representative?
It's a great question. So usually what they do is they put together what we call an ad hoc committee, which basically just means you'll get a senator or two and a House of representative or two that will basically come together in a very informal nature and just have a conversation about it. and they'll come up with an agreement. They'll say, okay, these changes are fine, we accept them, and then they'll pass it. They'll pass it through the House on the House floor. They'll say, basically, we agree. I have to remember, it is kind of it can be a technical process. They have either a reconciliation committee, which is formal, but most often they do things in sort of an informal, conversational way. It is behind closed doors. So it depends. And that's a good question. I can try to get you a more formal answer. Part of it is it depends on the nature of the
Well, yeah, towards the end there, the audio started kind of cutting in and out. We heard 95% of what you said, I think, but.
Oops. I just dropped the mic entirely. Yeah, so it's a good question, and I actually have to get back to you on the specific details, but most of the time, it's an informal process where the Senate will appoint a senator or two, and the House will appoint a representative or two, and they'll basically have a conversation. What changes did you make to the bill now that it's gone over to the House? Are they generally acceptable? Do we generally agree with it? Yeah, okay, great, then it's a done deal. The bill will just pass. If they've made a bunch of changes and they can't come to an agreement, then sometimes they'll have a more formal process. But with this bill, I would anticipate it to be an informal committee if they do make any changes to the bill.
Okay. So thank you for asking my question. Bye.
Thank you.
Other questions? Can we just open it up to questions, Emily? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to ask a question next? All right, yeah, go ahead, Brittany. Jump on in there. Literally jump.
Hello.
Hello.
So my question is, what are some of the obstacles that the bill might face in the House?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm going to kind of put that question back to you a little bit, and maybe we can brainstorm together what obstacles the bill would face. What would you anticipate, knowing what you know about the bill and the process? What are some obstacles you might say are possible?
The representatives might make it harder to pass the bill.
Yep. Why?
For some reason, they might not like the bill, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, they might not like the bill. It might be political, right? That's one reason that a bill might not pass. What are some other reasons?
That's the only reason I know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big overarching reason, right? If people just don't like it, that's a big reason. And they might not like it for a lot of different reasons. One reason the other chamber might not like it is political, right? So a couple things. In our legislature right now, we have very narrow margins of party control. What do I mean by that? In the House of Representatives, there are 50 elected right now. There are 50 Democrats and 48 Republicans. That's a very small margin of error for control, right? That the House only basically has a 1-vote majority, because if it's a tie, then there's no majority. The Senate, the same thing. It's 26 to 20. Oh, I should know this off the top of my head. It's 25 to 24, okay, in favor of the Democrats. The one thing that happens sometimes is if there's stay with me here. If there's a legislator who's in what's called a swing district, which means, they've narrowly won by a small majority, right? Where let's say they only won 51% of the vote, right? Let's say it's a Democrat and they won 51% of the vote. Okay. If they're up for re-election, well, let's put it in reverse for a real world situation, right? Let's say it's a Republican and they won by 51% of the vote, right? There's a lot of Democrats in their district, but just a few more people voted for this Republican. The Republican won in a swing district. If that person is the prime sponsor of the bill, right, and it's going over to, let's say, the House or the Senate that we know is controlled by Democrats, well, it might not be within the best interests of the Democrats to pass this Republican bill, because it gives that person a win, and they can go back to their district and say, see what I did for families in our district and across the state. So I know that's kind of, it sounds a little sketchy, right? But sometimes one chamber won't want to give a particular legislator a win, because that will make that person look effective, and you don't want them to look effective, because then they can get reelected. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got it.
So sometimes it's about politics. Sometimes it can be about time. And this is huge, right? What do I mean when I say time? Are we in a short session or a long session right now? What do you guys know?
Sure.
Right? It's a 60-day session. There's something like 14 working days left of legislative session. Hundreds of bills, if not thousands of bills. If a bill is even a little bit controversial, that means it can take up more time. It means when it comes over to the House, if people really don't like it, let's say, okay, this bill, for example, is a Democratic bill that it's bipartisan. There's some Republicans who have signed on to the bill, but it's being prime sponsored by a Democrat, okay? Let's say it comes over to the House floor. House is controlled by Democrats too. But let's say some of the Republicans really don't like it. One way that they can slow down the bill is they can offer a bunch of amendments to the bill on the House floor or in committee. We call that Christmas treeing a bill, okay? Because what do you do with Christmas trees? You put a bunch of ornaments on it and it weighs it down. So if a legislator or legislators wanted to slow down a bill, they could just throw a bunch of amendments on it. They can be really silly amendments, they can be serious. But if they have to consider each one of those amendments, that takes time. Short session, not a lot of time. They can either, the party that's in control can say, oh my goodness, this bill has 20 amendments on it. Maybe we're not even going to consider it because it's going to take up that much time that we could be passing all of these other bills. So in answer to your question, sometimes time is a huge factor in why a bill doesn't pass. Sometimes it's politics. Sometimes it's cost. In this case, like we talked about, this bill doesn't seem to cost a lot of money out of the general fund, the state's piggy bank. The financial implications happen somewhere else. So that shouldn't be a big problem. And then, like I said, politics, right? If it is a very conservative ideological bill, which this bill I would argue is not, because it is bipartisan, it's the subject matter particularly political or partisan. If the bill is super political and the other party doesn't like it, and that other party is in control, that's a reason they may not, that could slow it down or kill it. In the case of this bill, I don't see a lot of problems. It has bipartisan support. A big indicator, this is probably the most important answer to your question, how many votes did it have when it passed the Senate floor? I did a quick look. I don't remember the vote count in total. Maybe you guys do. But it passed through the Senate pretty easily without a lot of opposition. And if that's the case, that's a pretty good indicator that the bill should have a similar time coming through the House floor.
Jeffrey back here says there were 43 yes votes in the. Huh? 43 yes votes in the Senate. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. So it tells you it's very popular. It's got a lot of support. The other key thing that I think is really helpful in answering your question about what's the path forward in the House is listening to testimony, right? Listening to what legislators are saying about the bill, listening to the questions that legislators are asking. If it's a bill that's being prime sponsored by a Democrat, and when you're watching the hearings in the committees, if you notice that some Republicans are asking really hard questions, or you hear when it goes to the Senate floor, there's a lot of debate about it, then that can give you an indication that the same people or the people of the same parties in the other chamber may have some of the same questions about it. But I don't think really that is the case on this bill. It's pretty bipartisan.
Okay, thank you. I got it.
Who wants to ask the question next? Alex, Jeffrey, Dylan?
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, what are the pathways that you took to become a lobbyist?
That's a great question. So, what are the pathways I took to become a lobbyist? I'll just say, I think one of the things that's really interesting about lobbying is that people come to this work from a lot of different perspectives. Some people, they have had an interest in, let's say, healthcare, right? And they know a lot about healthcare. They either worked as advocates in healthcare, or they're, worked for insurance companies or medical or whatever. And they liked the process and they liked policies, so they came into the legislature that way. And I think I may have talked a little bit about this, but my path was really through community organizing. Before I was doing lobbying, I was working with people who were directly impacted by issues. I was working with low-income tenants who are having issues with their housing, and I helped them sort of understand what their rights were as tenants, and we did some advocacy within the Seattle City Council. And that was really important for me because I saw when people who are directly impacted by issues, whether it's, renters who are having problems with their landlords, or students, I got to work with young people who were undocumented, who were advocating for the State Dream Act so that they could have access to financial aid to go to college, and a variety of different people who are directly impacted by issues. What I saw was when they had the opportunity to interface with elected officials and lawmakers and tell their own story, their voices were really, really impactful and helped shape that process, the legislative process. So that's really what got me into lobbying, was basically direct service, community organizing, and learning a little bit more about policy, and getting to work within an organization where I was able to come down to the Capitol, work with people, work with lawmakers. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I did what a lot of lobbyists do, which is go from being an employee of an organization or a company or something like that, doing the work within being an employee, to basically starting my own business where people would hire me to represent them. So the difference would be like, let's say your classroom was an organization, right? And I was a student in the classroom, right? And I was your lobbyist as a student, as part of that class. That's what I used to do. Then I left, started my own company. And now, in this example, your classroom would hire me as a private contractor to represent you. So it's the difference between being an employee in-house versus being a contractor and representing you as a client.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Alex, you want to ask yours next? I want to piggyback on that question, actually, and just based on the other lobbyists you know or have met. I don't know, is there a breakdown of how many might come from the business world on that side of consulting, or like how many follow your path versus other paths?
Yeah, a lot of people have, it's all different, right? I would say, maybe roughly half of lobbyists, or more than half, kind of come from the business perspective, where their clients are insurance companies or, associations, right? That's one of the big places where you see representation, or associations, right? So like, associations are just different groups with a common interest. So you have the Washington Student Association, which is an association that represents all of the students in the four-year institutions. So UW, WSU, all of that. And so they have an association where they represent students. There's, commissions, like there's a group called something like the Potato Commission, which represents all of the agricultural potato growers, right? There are, there's like the Washington Health Plan Association, which represents all of the different insurance plans in Washington state. So each one of those different associations have lobbyists. I'll give you a real world example. One of my clients is a group called Leading Age Washington. And we are the association, the group that represents all of the different individual, nonprofit, long-term care facilities. So think nursing homes, assisted living, we call that long-term care, basically services for the elderly. So that association represents all of the individual providers. So yeah, so there's a lot of lobbyists that come from a business perspective. There's also a lot that come from like nonprofit advocacy or law and policy. But you know, one of the things I love about the legislature is so many people come from all sorts of different walks of life. There's also a lot of unions. So, you know, there's unions are basically like the association for different types of workers, right? There's a teachers union. There's the union for firefighters. There's unions for healthcare workers. There's all sorts of different unions, and they all have lobbyists as well. So, basically, you know, whether it's a subject matter that interests somebody or they've been in the trenches doing the work, there's lots of different ways people can become lobbyists, both formally, like what I do, but then also informally. You know, you care about a particular issue. I keep coming back to the work I did with undocumented students. You know, let's say you think that the food in your cafeteria, it should be, you know, you should have more options. It should be healthier. Well, you can come down informally as a student and talk to legislators and lobby that you have better food choices in your cafeteria, which we've seen students do in the past. So lots of different options.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question. Are you doing separate work to convince the politician, or are there any interest groups doing the same thing to convince the politician, or is there any collaboration between you and any interest groups to convince the politician?
Before you answer that, Emily, I just want to repeat it so that Alex was talking a little softly, just so everybody else could hear it back here. I think, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're getting at, in Emily's work, does she like coordinate with other interest groups separate from the ones that might have hired her? Like how much coordination is there between lobbyists and interest groups, or kind of doing your own thing on a bill separately?
Yeah, is that your question, Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's a great question, and that is a huge part of what I do is coordination with other groups. You know, on a particular issue, there's usually multiple groups that want a similar thing. So let's give a real world example of something that I work on. Okay, here's one. Well, let's see. No, that's too complicated. So like for one of my clients, we work on a policy. So I represent a group called NARAL, which is a group that works on reproductive health care for women and all people. And so we're working on a particular bill to expand coverage for abortions. And so we have a particular interest in the bill. There's also other interest groups that have an interest in the bill. You maybe have heard of Planned Parenthood. I work with that organization to help advance this particular policy and a lot of other policies. I also work with a group called Legal Voice, which does more of the legal side of things, but about access to healthcare. And then there's all sorts of other groups that I coordinate with as the lobbyist for NARAL that all want the same or similar things with regard to a particular issue, in this case around a particular bill on abortion. So, you know, that's one example. I also work on long-term care issues as another example. So I work on a bill around assisted living. Well, my organization that I represent, Leading Age, represents all of the nonprofit facilities. There's also an organization that represents all of the for-profit facilities. So together we have all of the facilities. We have a little less than half. They have a little more than half of different types of facilities. So we work really closely to try to move that legislation. You've probably heard the example or the expression, more hands make lighter work. So the more people you have that have a similar interest in something, pushing it is helpful. I may have really good relationships with legislators A, B, C, D, L. Another organization may have really good relationships with legislators X, Y, Z, and N. And so together, right, when we put our efforts together, we can move a particular piece of legislation easier. The other, I think, flip side of the coin to that question is sometimes you have organizations that don't want a particular bill to pass. So sometimes what I have to do is work with the other side, work with the people that oppose the bill that my client wants, try to figure out, is there some area of compromise? Can we find some sort of negotiation? You don't like this aspect of it. Well, can we, give a little, take a little on this issue? Sometimes people just really don't like it and you just have to push on anyway. But to answer your question, a lot of what I do is, yes, work with other interest groups to figure out what's the path forward.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. And a quick question for the class. Did you guys get the opportunity to do any advocacy on the bill with legislators?
That's you a question. Did you do any advocacy? Did you write letters?
Oh yeah, we did.
Oh yeah, we did.
Did you get any response?
No.
Not as of yesterday. We sent those. We sent them via email, and when was that? It's been about 7 to 10 days. I can't remember exactly when we did it. And we checked yesterday, hadn't had a response yet.
Okay. Can somebody summarize what some of the reasons you asked? What did you say about why you want the bill, or what were the talking points that you used?
What was your argument?
Yeah.
Somebody want to come up in the email? Just do it from memory, just in general. What were you saying? Why
Yeah.
did you say it was a good idea?
Yeah, bro. Go ahead.
I know for the letter.
What's that?
He's slowly coming towards the front here to sit in the chair. Or you can just summarize it. You don't have to read it.
I don't really remember what
He doesn't want to mix up.
Somebody else. What were the main points? Why did you say it was a good idea?
Kids.
Okay, so put a heavy emphasis on education of future citizens of Washington was one thing. What else?
I don't remember. I have to look.
Good.
Nice.
They are struggling to remember what they wrote, apparently.
Okay, no worries. I think we probably have to wrap up fairly soon, but
We do. We are actually over time. I have one last question, if you have time. Since we'll see you in just a few short days, we'll see you on Tuesday.
Yep.
I'll do my best to let them know what to expect. I've been to Olympia a dozen times, maybe, but obviously far fewer than you, far less experienced than you. I was just wondering if you could spend a minute just helping us know what to expect. What's it going to be like down in Olympia when we visit with legislators?
yeah, so it's really fun. Things move around pretty fast. It can be a little chaotic, but when you come down, they will have just finished a pretty big deadline. So you might see some people who are kind of tired and fatigued, but also excited because the deadline has come and gone. So, and yeah, I think we're still trying to set up some of those meetings. I think people will have to be kind of flexible and easygoing. Legislators will probably spend a few minutes coming and meeting with us, but it's somewhere between fun and exciting and, being really patient, because sometimes you have to wait a half hour for a legislator to be able to come out. So I'm really excited. I hope we get to have some legislators come talk with the class. We might meet with staff instead, but I think between touring the Capitol and talking with some legislators and seeing the TDW studio, which is really, really cool, it's one of the most unique programs, I think, in the nation in terms of what it does. I think it'll be a really fun day. And as long as you have your expectations kind of open to go with the flow, I think it'll be a really cool experience for you guys.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, we're a little bit over time, so we should probably take our leave of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
See you Tuesday.
Okay. Bye-bye.